What gear would I have liked to have had when I was a sniper? This week on Mail Call Mondays. Mail Call Mondays is brought to you by Modular Driven Technologies. If you need a chassis system for your precision rifle, check out mdttac.com. I'm John McQuay with 8541 Tactical, and this is Mail Call Mondays, the show that answers your questions about precision rifles, optics, and equipment. Welcome to another Mail Call Mondays, and this Monday, our question comes from Dan, and Dan asks, my question is, of all your modern PRS gear you have now, what would you have liked to have had back in the Corps? Thanks, and keep up the good work. Well, Dan, narrowing it down to one specific item is really difficult, so I'm going to talk about a couple of different things. Now, first of all, for those of you guys that are watching, I got out of the Marine Corps in 2000. When I left active service, this rifle in front of me, the M40A1, was still the current issue for Marine snipers. This is a bolt-action 308 that is based on the Remington 700 receiver, but it is actually custom built by the Precision Weapons section in Quantico for Marines. It's one of the really hallmarks of this rifle is it's built by Marines for Marines. It is topped with a 10 power Untitled scope. This one actually has a US Optics 10 power scope, but other than the fact that this is made by US Optics and the originals, the one that was on my issued rifle, was made by Untitled, other than that, the scope is pretty much identical. This one has had an update to the internals. They use a slightly different spring system, but that's getting into the minutia of it. The stock on this rifle is a Macmillan HTG stock. Those are still currently available, and in fact, you can build this complete rifle, with the exception of the rifle scope, from currently available parts. There are some issues getting the scope mounts and the scope. US Optics does reproductions from time to time. When I purchased this one, they were tapering down and they weren't planning on doing any more. But it appears that they do occasionally do another run of these scopes, but they are extremely expensive for a fixed 10 power scope. The body of the scope is actually stainless steel. It is not aluminum like you would normally have. The mounts also have to be reproduced because they are an old Redfield mount that was modified for these scopes. So there's a lot of stuff in here that is unique to this rifle. It's kind of cobbled together from a bunch of different parts. Even the floor plate on this rifle here, it is a standard hinged, if I can release it, a standard hinged floor plate, but whereas Remington 700s have their own floor plate, this is actually a Winchester Model 70 floor plate and trigger guard. The reason being is the Winchester pieces were steel, and they were really higher quality back when this rifle was being produced, when it was sourced from Remington. So they stuck with the Winchester parts. It also may have had to do with the fact that they had some old Model 70s that they may have cannibalized for parts as well. But that starts to get out of a little bit of my lane. I'm not a sniper historian. I know basically what I was taught when I was in active service. And again, this was our active rifle, or our issued rifle. Now, one thing I will point out, you notice on the front here, this is a sling swivel. These sling swivels are screwed into the stock. They are not QD swivels like you see on a lot of hunting rifles. And more importantly, there is no sling swivel stud. The swivel actually has a screw on it. It is a non-separable part. You actually have to thread the sling through it. The swivels are threaded in and are part of the stock for all intents and purposes. You really don't want to remove them because you start hogging out those holes in there. So this rifle is not designed to attach a bipod to. It was designed to be able to be laid across field gear, laid across sandbags, emplacements, barricades, whatever you have, and steadied that way. It was never designed to have a bipod attached to it. So really, if we're going down along that line, that's really the first thing will be a bipod, because that aids in getting a proper zero, and that aids for those extreme long-range shots from prone. So there are a lot of compromises that we had to make these rifles work well. You notice that I have a really low comb on here, and it's not adjustable. Same thing with the buttstock, is it has a fairly long length of pull, much longer than I prefer to shoot now, and it is not adjustable. So we used to tape cheek pads on here to build it up for our personal eye relief. I have not done that on this guy. I really need to get off my butt, do that, and then field prep this and paint it so you guys can see that whole process. But the main piece of gear, I guess, overall, that I wish I had back then that I have access to now is the rifle system. I have access to much, much better rifles now. Even if we stay with the 308, the 7.62x51 NATO cartridge, then I have rifles chambered in that cartridge that would do this job much, much better. Higher magnification, variable magnification, so if you end up in an urban situation where you're much closer into the target, you can crank back that magnification and get a wider field of view. If you are shooting longer range targets, then you can dial that magnification up and get a much more detailed view of the target. With this, 10 power is what you got. And at the time, that was a good thing, because the variable power scopes were hit or miss on holding their zero when you adjust them. The old 3x9s, you didn't turn that magnification dial. It could actually throw the zero off in the scope. So that is really something that I would look at as my key piece of gear upgrading. But assuming that you're actually talking about equipment, not the issued rifle, and I would have to work with this rifle, then one of the primary pieces of gear, not necessarily for PRS competition, but for general field shooting, would be the laser rangefinder. This is a Sig Optics Kilo 2400 BDX laser rangefinder. You see this guy is really small, really compact, very lightweight. It runs on one CR2 battery, so you can carry quite a few extra batteries for this guy. And they are fairly weather resistant and fairly durable. I've bounced them around, banged them around, and they work really, really well. They've got a bunch of different modes in here so that you can do compensation for angles. You can set this guy up to communicate with a Kestrel, communicate with all kinds of different ballistic softwares, PDAs, that kind of stuff, to be able to move that stuff back and forth. But even if we're not talking about all the networking features on this guy, just being able to push the button and have a very accurate range to target within the engagement envelope that the rifle is capable of is miles above anything that we used to do. Back in the day, we had to either rely on map recon, we had to mill targets, we had to do all that stuff. You could hope that your mission required that you were either co-located with armor, or that you had laser designators, that kind of stuff out there, that you could be able to get a range from that. But mainly we were doing it from mill relation and map recon. And if you're doing your range estimation that way, you really just have to have a spotter that is really on. So if that first round is not a hit, then you can correct and drive on. And again, with a 10 power scope and big old honking mill dots in here, getting that range estimation, milling those targets, really becomes an art, and it becomes really your ability to know your rifle scope and the quirks of the individual scope. So a laser rangefinder really, really would have been a great help back then. The next thing I will talk about really is support gear. because again, that these rifles don't have bipods, then being able to support them was really, really important. And while we usually would take off our 782 gear, our deuce gear, and you'd ball it up in front of you, and your butt pack would be on top, and that would serve as the rest of the rifle. It would kind of work like the Wiebad pump pillow that I have right here, except you would have all kinds of field gear and stuff in there. Guys would strategically place ponchos and all that so that the rifle would rest on a soft portion of your gear, and the gear would fold in and encompass the forend of the rifle. So that worked really well when you're shooting from a prone position, but if you're shooting from anything other than a prone position, we really started to have difficulty getting the rifle held steady for longer range shots. And that's where one of these would have really come in. Now, ignore my gloves that I've got clipped to the bottom here. I forgot to take them off before we started rolling. But the Wiebad pump pillow, this thing is excellent for barricade shooting. Now, I have a slightly larger Coltac cuddle bag as well. But the Wiebad seems to be the sweet spot for either putting the rifle across and shooting in certain circumstances, or putting on my arm and putting into different body positions. Now, I don't have a leash on here. A leash is a really nice thing to have. That way you can clip it to your belt, you can sling it across your body, that kind of stuff. The Coltac bag, it has its own strap, and on that, I will generally just wear that bag across my body behind me so I can grab it and sling it up and do whatever I need to do with it without it getting in the way. But the Wiebad this was really my first large bag that I started working with to see if it worked for me, and it works amazingly. If you are a professional sniper, you really owe it to yourself to get one of these guys. They really don't weigh all that much, and with the clips, you can just snap it to the outside of your gear, and if you're doing a short movement from a car to a hide, it's really not that big of a deal. If you're doing a longer field movement, as a military sniper, then you would probably want to put it inside your pack or somehow lash it down a little tighter, because just swinging around by the carabiner would probably get old really quickly. But the pump pillow allows you to not just fill in gaps in your body position, just to tighten things down and make you more stable when you're shooting off of barricades. If you have to shoot across something, a hood of a car, hood of a vehicle, a barricade, or a trench wall, things like that, then you can put the rifle through the straps on the pump pillow and set it on that, and then you have that nice soft position. And if you stabilize the rifle over the pump pillow, very often you can get a rock solid position and get the shots that you need. I've taken pretty long range shots with that rig across a barricade. So the pump pillow is really one of those things that I wish we had these back in the day. I wish we had the forethought to do something, even just taking a stuff sack full of poncho liner clothes, that kind of stuff, and putting it where we need to put it. That would have made those really long setups on a concealment or on a stock a whole lot nicer, a whole lot easier, and a whole lot more stable. Now, stability is key, and that's where I'm going to switch over to the next piece of gear, and that is this guy right here. This is a Really Right Stuff tripod. This is one of their SOAR, Sport Optics and Rifle line tripods. It's carbon fiber. It is a really Gucci piece of gear. We did a full review on it. It is fairly expensive, but it works very, very well. We have it topped with their vise attachment. There is also a very similar piece of equipment called the hog saddle. The hog saddle came out long before the vise. They both do very similar things in slightly different manners. The hog saddle was developed by a Marine Scout sniper to fill in a need that we found back in the day when we were just rigging gear on our own, and that thing is excellent. The vise, I have a slight preference for it because of the knob and because of how easy it is to spin this guy and open and close it. The hog saddle takes a little bit longer to get things set up, but with the hog saddle, because of the way the knob is, you can crank that down and get a lot tighter grip on the fore end of the rifle as well. So it's pros and cons just depending upon what you prefer. Now, tripods, we had tripods back in the day. So this is not anything new. In fact, it kind of cracked me up when I saw more and more PRS type shooters start to use tripods. Now, the way they're used now, I wish I knew about that back in the day, because they've come up with some very novel ways to use the tripod based on competition. And I'll talk a little bit about that here at the end. The tripods that we had were generally just camera tripods. Usually the cheaper the better, because again, on a Marine rifleman's pay, you don't have a whole lot of cash to go drop on gear. Really, this guy, if I had to go out and buy it with my own cash, probably would have been out of reach for me at that time as a young lance corporal, and even as a sergeant. So it's nice that some of our guys are getting gear like this through different channels now, and they're getting gear issued to them from the military that works this way now. But we would go to Walmart, Kmart, whatever was handy, and purchase a fairly lightweight aluminum and plastic camera tripod. And then we would go over to the hardware store, or we would snoop around and find what we could, and we would build a cradle with isomat foam, and mine was actually made with aluminum channel and isomat foam, and then rigger's tape holding everything together. And we would screw that saddle on top of the tripod, and that's what we would use for stocks, for concealments, and for shooting. It really was not the greatest thing, because in your career you would go through several tripods. You would break the plastic spreader for the legs, and then it would go everywhere. You would break the clamps, you would break off the levers, you would crack the head where you would tighten down the tilt mechanism, because those were not designed to carry the weight of a rifle and to be banged around the way we would. So you would bust them up all the time. You would have to go out, you have to make a new one. Usually you were able to build the saddle well enough that you could just take it off of that one, go out, grab another tripod, screw it together, and then spray paint it. You would always have boot bands tied around all the legs so that you could stick veg down into the legs of the tripod. And it really just, it was the best we had at the time, but it really did not work well. I have beaten this guy up pretty well. I put a ton of weight on it. I have put my entire body weight on this tripod, stabilizing it, doing different tripod shooting techniques, and not damaged it in any way, shape, or form. There is no way that I could have done that on a tripod back then. I could actually clamp the rifle into this, set it very low, and even though I don't have a bipod on this rifle, I can use this in the same manner and use a rear bag and be able to stabilize it and use it to zero the rifle. So they really, really are a great option. The stability from a tripod like this also aids in milling, so getting your range estimation and all that fun stuff. It just makes everything easy. The only drawback is, even though this is carbon fiber and aluminum, it is still heavier than the tripods that I carried back then. So, you know, the weight is a little bit of a drawback, but, you know, Marines are used to humping a ton of weight anyway. So if you only have one guy out of the team that had to carry something like this, not that big of a deal. In fact, as we've gone along, the actual weight of the rifle itself seems to have been creeping up. So, you know, not that great big of a deal. So really, if I had to choose out of all the gear that I presented here, I would probably choose the tripod. It is the most expensive of all the gear that I pointed out here. And again, we'll leave the link to the full review down below. Since we originally reviewed that, Really Right Stuff has made some significant improvements to the tripod that are precision rifle oriented, and hopefully we will cover more of that at the SHOT Show at the end of this month. We have Really Right Stuff on our list of vendors to go talk to. So if I had to pick one, I would probably pick the tripod. The tripod would have made my life significantly easier, even if I went with a lighter weight head maybe and a lighter weight cradle on it. With the way this tripod is set up, I could have totally taken the ball head off and just screwed a cradle right on top of the tripod and just used the sticks and a cradle and lost a lot of weight on it and still had it very, very easy to use and very stable for shooting off of. So that would be my pick. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about PRS competition and how it has impacted professional snipers, both military and law enforcement snipers. As competition usually does, it has pushed that upper edge in both equipment and technique and has caused shooters to develop new techniques, new ways of using the equipment, and then gone back and redesigned some of the equipment to work better specifically for precision rifle engagements. Tripods have demonstrated that significantly. We've gone from modified camera tripods to tripods that are specifically designed to shoot a rifle off of. They're specifically designed to accept the weight of a human being and the banging around that we would cause them, because that is a significantly higher stress load than just holding a camera. Even when we start talking about larger cinema cameras, the ability for the tripod to hold that camera steady, it's nothing really compared to the ability to hold a rifle, hold it steady, and then tolerate the recoil and the jarring that we're going to provide on it. So until you get into really, really big old school film cameras, the tripods that we use for precision rifle shooting are fairly robust. Now, of course, they have to balance that with the lightweight. Now, tripods aside, just how the tripods are being used has advanced significantly. If you asked me 5 years ago if I had ever thought to deploy a tripod and then hold one of the legs against the buttstock of the rifle to stabilize the rear of the rifle while the front end is on a barricade, that never would have come into my mind. I am just not that creative. But we see shooters doing that now. And so you run into a situation where you need to go up, set up really fast, and get a very stable shot off. That is a viable technique to use. Now, that translates directly over to military and law enforcement situations, because obviously you don't want to stick your head up over a barricade or be in a situation where you're exposed for a long period of time while you're setting everything up and you're dinking around with stuff. You would much rather be able to deploy stuff down behind cover or behind concealment, and then when the time's right, go up, throw things up, get set up, and be prepared to be able to send a round down range. It may be something in a law enforcement situation where you're covering a raid, or you're covering a front door or an access point while a team moves up. You don't want to sit there and look around the corner and expose yourself, but in urban situations, it's much different from a field stock. You may not be in a situation where you can set up a solid position and remain concealed for long enough. So techniques like that really have begun in PRS, and then they have worked over into the professional side of it. Same thing with the bag. They have begun in competition, and they have moved over to professional military and law enforcement snipers. The laser rangefinders, that was an obvious thing. We had laser rangefinders back in the day, but they were really designed for a totally different purpose, not precision rifle shooting, and they were much larger, much bulkier, had to be supported by a tripod, all that fun junk. So now the fact that I have one that I could stick in a shirt pocket if I wanted to is just absolutely amazing. I think of how many stocks where it would have been really nice just to get in a position, come up, lays it, no, okay, I'm where I need to be. I can start setting up here rather than guessing or end up way too close, all that fun stuff. Not even talking about actually shooting unknown distance in the field. That thing is just amazing. But again, we have a lot of toys now that really would have made us more effective back then. Now, interestingly enough, we get a lot of people that lament that precision rifle shooting has gone that direction, that now it is an equipment race in the open class. We talked about two Mail Call Mondays ago, has PRS gone too far with equipment? And the overwhelming response that I got from you guys is basically yes, that it has gone too far, that there is too much equipment needed. I still hold that I want to see open class stay open class because it pushes the development of the equipment that has the capability of moving back and making professional snipers more lethal. So I really want to see that continue. I want to see that move forward. I am waiting for the day when there is a scope that has a button on the side of it that I put the crosshairs on the target, push the button, and that it will lays, account for range, account for drop, account for cant, account for wind drift, all that stuff. We are getting to that point. It's on the horizon, but it's not here yet. And when that day arrives, then I hope that every military and law enforcement sniper out there has access to that equipment to be able to make those first shot hits just easy as can be. Does that harm the craft as a whole? We can argue the same thing about optics on infantry rifles, dot sights on infantry rifles. Does that make a marksman less skilled but still able to make a precise shot? Possibly, but when we talk about skill versus lethality, if we can make a less skilled shooter more lethal, that's the whole purpose of a military shooter. So still in competition, I really want to see us rely on different classes to help break that up. If you're the kind of guy that wants to come out and do this for fun, because really very, very few shooters that shoot PRS are professionally paid full-time shooters. A lot of the pro shooters are in the industry. Shooting is a small portion of what they do. They have other jobs at shooting-related companies and shooting support companies. So we don't have guys that are really out there that is 100% of their income is shooting precision rifle matches. So it's still an enjoyable undertaking. It is a pastime for guys. And if guys want to go out and play with all the toys, then so be it. We should have a division that allows them to do that. But in the same vein, if you have guys that want to go out and take a rifle like this and shoot a PRS match, which I have actually considered, not necessarily a large PRS match, but maybe one of our local matches, going out and actually shooting this guy for a regular course of fire, I think it would be an absolute blast. If you want to go out and do that, then you should be able to do that in a gear limited class or gear limited division. So something like tactical, where you're limited to 308, you're limited as to what equipment you can bring up to the line, what equipment you're going to drag around, and what things you have mounted on the rifle itself. I think that really always needs to be there for two reasons: for just old crusty guys that want to run, and I'm lumping myself into the old crusty guys, by the way, so don't get offended. Guys that want to run basic equipment, and it needs to be there for the new shooters that are going to come into this and are not going to be able to drop $1,000+ on a tripod, quite a bit of money on a laser rangefinder, all the bags, all the extra stuff that come with it. They just want to take their hunting rifle out. They want to get in. They want to get their feet wet in competition and see how it goes. So I think we do need to keep those lower classes there so that people can still come out and have fun, because that is the name of the game in competition. Professional sniping is a very serious business. Fun is not the driving factor there. Precision rifle competition, fun is the driving factor. If you're not having fun shooting a PRS match or a local match or whatever, then you need to reevaluate how you're going about it, and it may not be the sport for you. There have been matches where I've stepped away and not been happy with my performance, but I don't know that I've had a match so far yet, even some really grueling, really nasty weather matches, that I've come away and I can't look at some point in the match where I enjoyed it, where I had fun. So that's the end of my sermon on that. So Dan, I hope that answered your question. I hope that took you through a little bit of the gear that and how it would have related to me back in the day. For those of you guys that are wondering, this was built for me by C&H Precision Weapons down in Florida. They did a fantastic job on it. I can't look at the rifle anywhere and see anything that was not consistent with our issued rifles back in the day. So they did a great job with it. I am eventually going to take some time and field rig this rifle, so put an appropriate cheek piece for me on it, and then tape it up and spray bomb it so that it looks like the rifles that we carried, because none of us actually took a rifle that looked like this to the field. They were all spray bombed with spray paint and had scratches and scuffs and bangs all over them. So I'm looking forward to getting this one painted up and rigged out, and again, take it out of the range and shoot it some more because it's been wandering to the back of the safe. That's it for this Mail Call Mondays. If you guys have liked this episode, please make sure you like, share, and subscribe. Click that little bell icon next to the subscription button to get notified when we release new content. This is the first Mail Call Mondays of 2019, and we look forward to a lot more this year. Hopefully, we'll be able to exceed the number that we did last year. We did miss a few weeks. But we are working hard on it, and we do knock out new content almost every week. So make sure you click that bell to be notified. If you guys have any questions or comments for anything we covered on this Mail Call Mondays or anything you'd like to see on future Mail Call Mondays, you can throw them in the comment section down below or send them to us on Facebook or Twitter. We do have a podcast. If you guys are listening to us on your favorite podcast app, then you can send questions to us at 854-1tactical@gmail.com. And until next time, get out and shoot.